He is an elderly father whom his daughter-in-law calls a nuisance and tells to shut up in front of everyone. She makes him pick up crumbs from the floor, denies him a place at the table, and accuses him of ruining the atmosphere in his own home. Every day she humiliates him with a calculated coldness, reducing him to a painful silence. What do you do when cruelty becomes a routine inside your own home? Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, leave a like and subscribe. The morning sun crept lazily through the half-open blinds of the apartment on the Upper East Side, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. In the pristine white kitchen, where every surface gleamed as if brand new, Arthur Miller tried to cut a day-old baguette with his trembling hands. His gnarled fingers, marked by decades of labor, gripped the knife as the metal scraped against the porcelain plate, producing a sound that seemed to wound the silence. "Please, don't make so much noise. My head is killing me," Victoria snapped from the kitchen doorway, her voice as sharp as a razor. Arthur flinched slightly, his bony shoulders outlined beneath the worn gray sweater that was too big for him. He had lost weight since he had come to live with his son, Ethan, and his daughter-in-law, Victoria. He nodded without looking up and set the knife aside, preferring to dip the bread into the thin broth he had been served, while the family had their breakfast of scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and freshly brewed coffee. "And don't make a mess, please," Victoria added as she adjusted her cream-colored silk blouse, which perfectly matched her designer pants. "Last night, you left stains on the tablecloth, and I had to change it. These things cost money, you know?" The apartment smelled of a mixture of reheated coffee and freshly used bleach on the cold floor. Every morning, the housekeeper, Maria, cleaned exhaustively under Victoria's supervision, who seemed obsessed with keeping every corner immaculate, as if Arthur's presence were a constant threat to her perfect order. "Yes, ma'am," he murmured, slowly sipping the warm broth. Victoria watched him from a distance, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on her latest generation smartphone. Her shiny black hair, pulled back in a flawless bun, framed an attractive but cold face, where a sincere smile rarely blossomed. The scent of her expensive perfume, a French fragrance with notes of jasmine and amber, filled the space, overpowering the smell of bleach and reminding everyone who was in charge there. "When you're done, wash your plate and cup. Maria already has enough to do with the general cleaning," she ordered before turning away, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble like tiny hammer blows in Arthur's ears. Since he had arrived to live with them 8 months ago, Arthur felt he occupied less space than a human being deserved. His cane, propped up by the kitchen door, seemed to ask permission to exist, just like him. He glanced at it as he chewed slowly, remembering the days when he walked tall, without needing support, when his presence filled a room and his voice was heard with respect. The hum of the modern refrigerator occasionally broke the silence, reminding him he was alone. In the hallway, hanging on the wall, a piece of modern art, abstract lines and shades of blue and gray that Victoria had acquired from an exclusive gallery, seemed as far from his understanding as his daughter-in-law was from his heart. Arthur finished his breakfast and stood up slowly, leaning on the edge of the table, his slippers, too large for his thin feet, shuffled to the sink. With hot water that reddened his knuckles, he began to wash the plate and cup. The foam rose in the drain, while the humidity clung to the back of his neck. He breathed with difficulty, feeling how every movement cost him more than it should. From the living room, he heard snippets of Victoria's phone conversation, her tone changing completely as she spoke to a friend, transforming into a syrupy, laughing voice she never used with him. "Of course, I'll see you at the club at 11. Then we can go to that new restaurant." "Yes, I know, the Thai place." The plate slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, breaking into 3 pieces. The sound cut through the air like a whip, and Arthur felt his heart stop for a moment. His eyes, a brown faded by the years, widened in terror. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its hum. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her phone call interrupted, with an expression so icy it seemed capable of freezing time. The silence that followed was so thick it could almost be touched. There were no shouts, no insults, just that look that diminished him, that turned him into something less than a man. That demeaning silence hurt more than any scream. I'm so sorry," Arthur stammered, crouching with difficulty to pick up the shards. His knees cracked painfully. "Leave it," she ordered. "You'll only cut yourself, and I'll have to take you to the doctor. again. Her tone implied that every medical visit was a bother, an inconvenience in her busy schedule. Arthur straightened up slowly, leaning on the edge of the sink. "I'll call Maria to come clean this up," Victoria continued, typing on her phone. "And you, please go to your room until we're finished. I don't want any more accidents today." Arthur nodded, picked up his cane, and walked slowly toward his room, the smallest in the apartment, located at the end of the hall, far from the main area. Every step was a reminder of his fragility, his dependence. Behind him, he heard Victoria resume her phone call. "Sorry for the interruption. No, nothing important. Just my father-in-law broke a plate. You know how old people are, like children, but with less charm." The laugh that followed was like a knife in his back. Arthur closed his bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the shame burn his face. He looked at his trembling hands and clenched them into helpless fists, wondering when his life had become this, when he had ceased to be a respected man and turned into a burden, a nuisance who dirtied white kitchens and broke expensive plates. The afternoon fell over New York as Arthur contemplated, from the window of his small room, the landscape of luxurious buildings that made up the Upper East Side. It's so different from Queens, the borough that had seen him born and raised. There, where the houses with tin roofs creaked when the rain hit hard and where the noise never stopped. Street vendors, music from old radios, children playing soccer with deflated balls, and dogs barking at all hours. He took a worn photograph from his nightstand drawer. He looked at it with moist eyes as he caressed the glass, protecting the image of Catherine, his wife, on their wedding day. She, in a simple white dress and a smile that lit up the entire picture. He, younger and stronger, in a borrowed suit, with the promise of a life together shining in his eyes. "Do you miss me, Catherine?" he whispered to the photograph. "I miss you more every day." From the left pocket of his sweater, he pulled out a wooden rosary, its beads worn from years of prayer. He had bought it at the big public market downtown when Ethan, their only son, was born. 42 years ago, when happiness and poverty coexisted under the same roof without contradicting each other. The sound of the front door opening interrupted his thoughts. He heard Ethan's deep voice greeting Victoria, the routine kiss, questions about the day. Arthur quickly put away the photo and the rosary. His son never came into his room, but if he did, he didn't want him to find him lost in memories that Ethan considered unnecessary, even annoying. "The past is the past, Dad," he had told him on more than one occasion. "Now, you have everything you need here." Everything he needed? Arthur closed his eyes and remembered his days in Queens. He had been born in a tenement building where 5 families shared a bathroom and water only came 3 times a week. His father, a bricklayer, taught him that work brings dignity when it's done with honesty. His mother, a laundress, died young, her hands cracked from cheap soap and her lungs weakened by the dampness. At 14, he was already carrying sacks at the market, heavy sacks of beans, rice, corn. His back gradually stooped, but his arms gained a strength that now, at 78, seemed a distant memory. When he met Catherine, she was selling flowers near the church. He gave her a rose every Sunday for months until she agreed to go out with him. They married with the little they had, a silver ring he bought on installment, the blessing of Father Thomas, and the sincere embrace of friends who, like them, struggled day by day to survive. They lived in a back room of a courtyard for years, until Ethan's birth forced them to look for something bigger. They got a small 2-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood. Catherine sewed for the neighbors. He worked a double shift at a furniture factory. At night, Arthur learned to mend clothes, sew on buttons, and do small repairs, all to save money and give his son an education. "You'll be different," he would promise him while helping with his homework. "You won't carry sacks or sweat under the sun. You'll use this," and he would tap his forehead with his finger, "to live a better life." Ethan was a brilliant student. He got scholarships, learned English, and went to college when no one in the family had even finished elementary school. Arthur sold hot dogs and pretzels with Catherine on cold mornings to pay for books and transportation. The pride made up for the exhaustion, the hunger, the rough hands. When Catherine fell ill, Ethan was finishing college. The cancer was swift and merciless. In 3 months it took her, in a December that brought cold and silence to the house. Arthur held his grief between the beads of the rosary, turning each prayer into strength to carry on. not to fail his son or the promise he had made to Catherine, to see him become a good man. Ethan delivered. He worked at tech companies, founded his own firm, and married Victoria, the daughter of a businessman from an upscale neighborhood. Success came with glass-walled offices, employees under his command, and trips abroad. And one day, 8 months ago, he showed up at the house in Queens with news. "I sold your house, Dad," he said, with a smile that was meant to be generous. "Now you're going to live with us on the Upper East Side. A big, comfortable apartment with security and a view of the trees. No more leaks, no more rusty pipes. You deserve it." Arthur didn't want to sell. Those walls held 60 years of his life, Catherine's presence in every corner. But Ethan insisted. The neighborhood had become dangerous. The house needed expensive repairs. It was absurd for an old man to live alone. "Old age is for resting, not for worrying," his son declared, ignoring that for Arthur, true rest was sitting in his worn armchair to watch the afternoon fade over the distant city skyline, greeting lifelong neighbors, going to Mrs. Gable's bakery to buy a sweet roll and listen to her stories. The day he moved into the apartment on the Upper East Side, Arthur arrived with a bag of sweet rolls to share and the framed wedding photo. Victoria looked at the rolls with disgust. "We have a French patisserie on the corner," and the photograph with disdain. "Maybe it's better in your room. It doesn't match the decor." Ethan, busy with work calls, didn't notice the small wounds those words opened in his father's heart. In the first few weeks, Arthur tried to adapt. He was grateful to have a roof over his head, to be near his son. But he soon understood that gratitude came at a high price. His independence, his dignity, his voice. The house was large, but the space for him was minuscule. Ethan worked most of the time. Victoria controlled every aspect of the home with an iron fist. A knock on the door brought him back to the present. Maria, the housekeeper, peeked her head in with a shy gesture. "Mr. Arthur, I brought you some tea," she whispered, looking over her shoulder to make sure Victoria didn't see her. "And a sweet roll I saved from breakfast." Maria slipped in, leaving the tray on the small table. She was a woman in her 50s, small, with her hair in a tight bun and kind eyes. Her hands, reddened by cleaning products, reminded Arthur of Catherine's. "Thank you, Maria," he smiled. "You're an angel." She shook her head, looking at the floor. "Don't say that. It's just, I don't think it's right how they treat you." They were silent for a moment. Outside, Victoria could be heard on the phone, her artificial laughter growing louder. "Have you spoken to Mr. Ethan?" Maria asked. "About how she treats you when he's not here." Arthur took a sip of tea, feeling the comforting warmth go down his throat. "My son is very busy," he answered in a tired voice, "and I don't want to be a burden. He already does so much by giving me this roof." Maria pressed her lips together, wanting to say more, but holding back her words. Finally, she just whispered, "If you need anything, let me know," before leaving as quietly as she had entered. Arthur looked at the steaming cup and the sweet roll, small gestures of kindness in the midst of the coldness. He looked out the window again, at the sky that was beginning to turn orange. He reached into his pocket where he kept the rosary and squeezed it between his fingers. "One day, this will change," he murmured, repeating the phrase that had become his mantra during these months. It wasn't a desperate plea. It was a quiet certainty that fit in the palm of his hand, between the worn beads of the rosary and the memory of Catherine's smile, which seemed to whisper to him from beyond that dignity, like faith, endures even on the darkest days. The morning broke gray, heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Arthur woke before dawn, as he had since he was young, when the workdays began with the first ray of sun. His body, now frail, remained anchored to the rhythms of a previous life. He sat on the edge of the bed, feeling every bone protest, and looked out the window. New York stretched out under a leaden sky, the buildings blurred by the morning mist. He heard movement in the kitchen. It was Friday, Maria's day off, which meant Victoria would be in a worse mood. Without a housekeeper to do the chores, Arthur's presence was even more of an annoyance to her. He dressed slowly, putting on the brown sweater that was too big for him. He had lost so much weight in these months that the clothes hung on him as if they belonged to someone else. His pants, held up by a tight belt, drew the silhouette of a man slowly fading away. As he left his room, he met Victoria in the hallway. She was wearing a designer tracksuit and her hair was in a high ponytail. "Good morning," Arthur greeted, forcing a smile. Victoria barely glanced at him. "We have to do a deep clean today," she announced bluntly. "Maria isn't coming, and I have guests this afternoon." Arthur nodded, used to this type of conversation, where his words were superfluous. "The disinfectant is under the sink," she continued. "I want the kitchen and powder room floors spotless, like a mirror, understand?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. Arthur nodded again, gripping his cane. At 78, kneeling to scrub the floor was torture. But the alternatives, the disdainful look, the cutting remark, the exasperated sigh, were worse. "Yes, ma'am," he replied in a low voice. "And when you're done, don't sit on the balcony," Victoria added as she poured herself a coffee. "The neighbors don't need to see you out there, as if you're on display. If you want some fresh air, you can do it in your room, with the window open." Each word landed like a small, sharp stone. They weren't blows, they weren't shouts, but they hurt with the same efficiency. The shame of being treated like a defective object that needed to be hidden had become a constant companion for Arthur. After a frugal breakfast, the same reheated soup from the day before, he began to clean. The cold water numbed his hands as he scrubbed the kitchen floor. The hard bristles of the brush opened small cuts on his already sensitive palms. The smell of bleach irritated his nose and made his eyes burn, but he didn't dare complain. Victoria came in and out, supervising his work with a critical eye. Sometimes she would point out a spot he had missed. Other times, she would simply shake her head, as if his very existence were a constant disappointment. "There, in the corner," she pointed with a perfectly manicured finger. "There's a mark you missed." Arthur dragged himself to the indicated corner, feeling his knees crack painfully against the hard floor. His back ached constantly, a reminder of decades of carrying weight, but this new pain was different. It was the weight of humiliation. "Scrub harder," Victoria ordered. "We don't have all day." At noon, when he finally finished with the kitchen and the bathroom, his hands were red and chapped. His palms burned where the skin had broken, but he didn't ask for a bandage or complain. He sat down on a kitchen chair, exhausted, allowing himself a moment of rest. Victoria entered with her phone in hand, talking animatedly to someone. Seeing him sitting, she frowned and covered the microphone. "Are you done? Then go to your room. I need the kitchen to prepare some appetizers." Arthur stood up with difficulty, leaning on his cane. His stomach rumbled with hunger, but he didn't dare ask for food. He walked slowly toward his room, each step a small ordeal. "Yes, of course," he heard Victoria say as he walked away. "It will be a perfect afternoon. Just us, no interruptions." The loneliness of his room, once a refuge, now weighed on him like a wet coat. He sat by the closed window. He didn't dare open it without permission, and watched the gray clouds drift lazily over the city. The rain began to tap softly against the glass, drawing paths of water that reminded him of the tears he wouldn't allow himself to cry. The phone Ethan had given him for his birthday, a simple model for emergencies, rested on the table. He picked it up with trembling hands and dialed the number of Mrs. Gable, his lifelong neighbor in Queens. "Arthur?" The woman's warm voice brought him a little comfort. "How are you, my friend?" "Fine, Luce, fine," he lied, as he always did. "I just called to see how you and the neighborhood are doing." Mrs. Gable told him the news from Queens. The Ramirez's son got married. The corner store now sold gourmet products for the new wealthy neighbors. Father Thomas kept asking about him. Every detail was a thread that connected him to his previous life, to a place where he belonged. "We miss you, Arthur," Mrs. Gable said at the end. "The neighborhood isn't the same without you. When are you coming to visit?" "Soon," he promised, knowing it was unlikely. Ethan was always too busy to take him, and Victoria would never set foot in Queens voluntarily. He said goodbye with a lump in his throat. The silence enveloped him again, only broken by the sound of the rain against the window and the distant voices of Victoria and her guests who were beginning to arrive. He spent the afternoon looking at old photographs he kept in a box under his bed. Catherine smiling beside the Brooklyn Bridge, Ethan with his college diploma, the little house in Queens decorated for Christmas. Memories of a life that seemed to belong to someone else, to a man who had once been respected, valued, loved. Darkness began to fall when the guests left. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the front door opening and Ethan's deep voice greeting his wife. Arthur quickly put away the photographs and straightened up, smoothing his sweater with nervous hands. Maybe his son would stop by to say hello, to ask how his day had been. He waited, holding his breath. He heard the conversation between Ethan and Victoria, their voices an indistinguishable murmur from his room. Finally, his son's footsteps moved away down the hall, toward the office where he spent much of his time at home, working or reading, always too busy for a visit to his father. Arthur exhaled slowly, the air escaping his lungs like a fading hope. He lay down without dinner, ignoring the hunger that gnawed at his stomach. The bed, though comfortable, felt cold and strange. He closed his eyes, clutching the rosary like a life raft in a stormy sea. At midnight, a sound woke him. Voices. In the hallway, tense whispers. He sat up slowly, listening. It was Victoria, speaking to Ethan in a low but clearly irritated voice. "I can't take this anymore," she was saying. "It's too much responsibility, too much work. Your father needs special care." "What are you suggesting?" Ethan's voice sounded tired, as if this conversation had been repeated many times. "A place where professionals can look after him," Victoria replied. "A high-end nursing home, of course. We can visit him on weekends." "I don't know, Victoria. My dad has always been very independent. I don't think he'll agree." "He doesn't have to agree," Victoria's tone hardened. "It's for his own good. Besides, the lawyer is coming tomorrow. Let him sign the house papers, and then we'll decide." "The house papers?" Ethan asked, confused. "The transfer of the property to your name," Victoria explained impatiently. "We've already talked about this. Besides, he doesn't even understand paperwork at his age. It's for the best." Arthur froze, feeling his heart pound painfully in his chest. The house. His house in Queens, which he believed had been sold to pay for this apartment where his son now lived. The last link to his past, to his life, to Catherine. "I'll think about it," Ethan finally said. "Let's go to sleep now. It's late." The footsteps faded, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. Arthur sat in the darkness, the revelation hitting him like a slap. Not only did they want to get rid of him, but also of the last thing he had left. The memory materialized in walls, in a small yard where Catherine had planted wisteria, on a doorframe where he had marked Ethan's growth year after year. He brought his trembling hands to his face. The tears, held back for months, flowed silently. The rosary slipped through his fingers, the worn beads falling onto his legs like drops of an ancient rain. A question burned inside him, more painful than any physical wound. Was he a burden or a father? A piece of luggage to be stored in a nursing home, or a human being with the right to live his final years with dignity? At dawn, exhausted from a sleepless night, he heard a soft knock on his door. It was Maria, who, despite it being her day off, had come in early. She entered stealthily, leaving a steaming cup and a freshly baked roll on the table. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur," she greeted in a low voice. "I brought your breakfast." She then noticed the old man's damp cheeks, his hands wounded from the previous day's work. "Are you all right?" she asked, genuinely concerned. Arthur shook his head. "They want to send me to a nursing home, Maria, and take my house in Queens." Maria pressed her lips together, not surprised, but her suspicions confirmed. She took a Band-Aid from her apron pocket and carefully placed it on the most visible wound on the old man's palm. "It's not right," she murmured. "It's not right how they treat you." Her phone vibrated. Twice. She took it out, nervous, and looked at the screen. A message from her daughter. As she opened it, Arthur noticed she had several voice memos saved in the app. Maria caught his glance and, after a moment of hesitation, pressed the play icon. Victoria's voice filled the small space. "Pick that up off the floor. You're not a dog. If you can't behave like a person, maybe you should eat in the kitchen, not with us." Another recording. "When the lawyer comes tomorrow, you just sign where you're told. You don't need to read anything. It's just a formality, understood?" And one more, the most recent. "We'll sort out the nursing home thing tomorrow. I've already done some research. Let him sign the house papers. He doesn't understand them anyway." Maria put the phone away with trembling hands. "I've been recording," she confessed, ashamed but resolute. "What they're doing isn't right. It's just not right." Arthur reached out his wounded hand and took Maria's, squeezing it gently. A simple, human gesture, the kind of contact that had been absent from his life for months. "Thank you," he whispered, feeling a thread of hope begin to weave itself in the darkness. That Friday afternoon, Ethan Mendes left the office early. He'd had a strange feeling during the meeting with investors, a sense of unease that wouldn't let him concentrate. As he drove his luxury car through the congested streets of New York, he remembered the call he'd received from his father last week. A brief call with broken sentences he'd attributed to tiredness. Now, with a clearer mind, he wondered if there was something more. The sky threatened a storm as he pulled into the underground parking garage of his building on the Upper East Side. He decided not to announce his arrival. He wanted to surprise Victoria, maybe take her out to dinner. The stress from work had kept him distant lately, and he felt he owed it to her. He took the elevator to the 12th floor and walked down the carpeted hallway. As he put the key in the lock, he heard a sharp noise from inside the apartment, like something falling to the floor. Then, Victoria's voice, sharp as a razor's edge. "Pick that up off the floor, you're not a dog." Ethan froze, the door ajar. Who was his wife speaking to in that tone? "I'm sorry, it slipped." His father's trembling voice barely reached him. "It's always the same thing," Victoria continued. "Broken plates, stains on the floor, messes. Can't you do anything right?" Ethan pushed the door open slowly. The scene he found in the dining room left him paralyzed. His father, bent over, picking up the shards of a plate from the floor, while Victoria stood beside the table, watching him with contempt. Broth was splattered on the immaculate floor, and Arthur kept repeating in a low voice, almost a mantra, "Don't hurt me, please, don't hurt me." Those words, murmured with genuine fear, shot through Ethan like a lightning bolt. He suddenly remembered the few times he had visited his father in his room, how he would avert his gaze, how his hands, those hands that had once been so strong, trembled when holding a cup. Signs he had ignored, convinced his father was fine, that he had given him the best. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. Victoria spun around, startled. Her face, for an instant, showed something like fear before composing itself into a forced smile. "Ethan, darling, we weren't expecting you so soon," she said, approaching to kiss him. "Your father had a little accident, nothing serious." Arthur remained frozen, the porcelain fragments in his trembling hands. When he looked up at his son, Ethan saw something that squeezed his heart: shame, a deep shame that should not exist in a father's eyes. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked, moving closer to him. "Yes, son, just—" "The plate fell," Arthur replied, trying to get up with difficulty. It was then that Ethan noticed his father's hands, reddened with small cuts, some covered by poorly placed band-aids. These were not the hands of someone living comfortably in his old age. They were the hands of someone who worked hard, who suffered. "What happened to your hands?" he asked, taking them gently. Before Arthur could answer, Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing her wrinkled apron, a look of profound indecision on her face. "Mr. Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to speak with you." "Not now, Maria," Victoria interrupted sharply. "We're busy. Clean this up and then you can go." Maria looked at Victoria, then at Arthur, and finally at Ethan. In her eyes shone a determination that contrasted with her usual submissive demeanor. "It's important, sir," she insisted. "It's about your father." Something in her tone made Ethan pause. He looked again at his father, now sitting in a chair with his gaze fixed on the floor, and then at his wife, who was showing growing irritation. "All right, Maria," he finally said. "Let's talk in my office." "Ethan, please!" Victoria interjected, grabbing his arm. "This isn't the time. We have plans for tonight, remember?" But Ethan was already walking toward his office, followed by Maria. Once inside, the woman closed the door and, with trembling hands, took out her cell phone. "I didn't want to get involved, sir," she began, her voice breaking, "but I can't keep watching how they treat Mr. Arthur. It's not right. It's not human." Maria unlocked the phone and pressed the play icon. Victoria's voice filled the room, each word harsher than the last. Insults, humiliating orders, veiled threats. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw tight, his fists clenched on the desk. "I have more," Maria said when the first recording ended. "Many more. I've been saving them for weeks because I knew no one would believe me without proof." She played another recording. This time, the conversation was about the nursing home and the house in Queens. Ethan turned pale as he heard Victoria's plans he had never authorized, plans that involved stripping his father of the last thing he had left. "The house? My father still has the house?" he asked, confused. Maria nodded. "It was never sold, sir. Mrs. Victoria put it in the name of one of her companies. And now she wants Mr. Arthur to sign some papers to transfer it permanently. Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to process what he was hearing. He remembered the conversation with Victoria, months ago, when she suggested it would be better to manage his father's property. He had been so busy, so immersed in work, that he had delegated these matters to his wife, trusting her blindly. "And the nursing home?" he asked, dreading the answer. "It's all arranged," Maria confirmed. "The lawyer is coming tomorrow with the papers. First the house, then the transfer." Something shattered inside Ethan, a crack in the perfect image he had built of his life. He remembered his father when he was a child, his calloused hands after carrying sacks at the market, the sleepless nights sewing buttons to save a few cents, the hot dogs they sold together on cold mornings to pay for his school books. And this was how he repaid him? By allowing him to be humiliated, stripped of his dignity, treated worse than a stranger? "Thank you, Maria," he said, standing up. "Don't worry, this ends today." He walked out of the office with a determined stride. In the dining room, Victoria was trying to convince Arthur to go to his room. "You should rest, Arthur," she was saying with a false sweetness that was now glaringly obvious. "It's been a long day." "He's staying," Ethan's voice cut through the air. "And you and I need to talk." Victoria turned, surprised by his tone. "What is it, darling? You're so tense." Ethan looked at his father, sitting in the chair, small and frail. He approached him and gently took his wounded hands. "Forgive me, Dad," he whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Arthur looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's not your fault, son." "Yes, it is," Ethan replied. "I should have been paying more attention. I should have seen it. But this is over." He turned to Victoria, who was watching the scene with growing nervousness. "I heard everything, the recordings, the plans, everything." The color drained from Victoria's face. "Recordings? What are you talking about?" "About the abuse," Ethan answered, his voice controlled but firm. "About how you've been treating my father when I wasn't here. About the house in Queens, the nursing home, everything." Victoria tried to deny it, then to justify herself. "Your father exaggerates, he's confused. You know how old people are. And that woman, Maria, she's never liked me. She has something against me." "Enough," Ethan cut her off. "The recordings are clear. And my father's hands," he pointed to the visible wounds, "are clear too." Arthur watched the scene with a mixture of relief and fear. For the first time in months, someone believed him. Someone saw his suffering. But the uncertainty of what would come next made his heart race. "You can't believe them over me," Victoria insisted, changing tactics. "I'm your wife." "And he's my father," Ethan replied, with a calmness that surprised even himself. "The man who sacrificed everything so I could get an education, so I could be who I am today. The man I owe my life to." He walked over to the coat rack by the entrance, took his father's cane, and returned to his side. He handed it to him with a solemn gesture, as if returning something much more important than a simple walking aid. "In this house, my father is respected," he said, looking directly at Victoria. "And you are leaving. Tonight." The silence that followed Ethan's words was thick, charged with an energy that seemed to compress the air in the room. Victoria stood motionless, her face a mask of disbelief that slowly twisted into contained rage. Arthur, sitting with the cane between his hands, watched his son with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude that moistened his tired eyes. "You can't be serious," Victoria finally said, recovering her composure. Her voice tried to sound firm, but a slight tremor betrayed her. "You're kicking me out of my own home because of the lies of a confused old man and a resentful maid?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the landline phone on a small table in the corner. He dialed a number and spoke briefly, asking for the building's doorman and the property manager to come up. Then he turned to his wife, his gaze more determined than ever. "They're not lies, Victoria. They're facts, and this situation cannot continue for another day." The afternoon wore on slowly as they waited. The rays of the setting sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor. Arthur, calmer now, watched the play of light and shadow, thinking about how his own life had been plunged into darkness for so long. Maria, standing by the kitchen, kept her gaze down but firm, her hands clutching her apron, as if drawing courage from the gesture. The doorbell rang 15 minutes later. The doorman, a middle-aged man named Alberto, entered, followed by the property manager, a stern-looking woman carrying a folder under her arm. Both seemed confused by the request, but maintained a professional air as they greeted them. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, inviting them to sit. "I need you to be witnesses to something important." Victoria remained standing, like an elegant but out-of-place statue, her expression fluctuating between indignation and fear. When Ethan asked Maria to play some of the recordings, she tried to stop him, claiming invasion of privacy, but her husband silenced her with a look that allowed no argument. The recorded voices filled the space, echoing off the walls like concrete accusations. Victoria's voice, cruel and cutting, contrasted with Arthur's muffled sobs or submissive replies. The doorman, Alberto, looked down, visibly uncomfortable. The property manager pressed her lips together, taking discreet notes in a small notebook. "This proves nothing," Victoria interrupted when the first recording ended. "These are snippets taken out of context. He would provoke me, make me lose my patience deliberately." "Did this provoke you too?" Ethan asked, pointing to his father's wounded hands. "Did he force you to make him clean the floors with cold water until his hands bled?" Arthur held out his trembling hands, palms up, showing the recent wounds and old calluses. They were maps of a life of hard work, of constant sacrifices, now marked by new wounds born of humiliation. "I only asked him to keep his space clean," Victoria defended, increasingly cornered. "It's the least someone living in another person's house can do." "It's not another person's house," Arthur intervened, his voice surprisingly firm. Everyone turned to him, surprised by the sudden strength emanating from that frail body. "This apartment was bought with the money from the sale of my house in Queens. Or so I was told." Victoria turned pale. The property manager cleared her throat, consulting her folder. "According to the building's records," she said in a professional tone, "this apartment is in Mr. Ethan Mendez's name. It was purchased 2 years ago, long before Mr. Arthur Mendez moved in." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear at once. When he opened them, he looked directly at Victoria. "What did you do with the money from my father's house?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria's silence was more eloquent than any explanation. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes revealed the growing panic of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble. "I had to manage it," she finally said. "Your father isn't fit to handle his finances. I invested it in stocks for his future." "In what stocks exactly?" Ethan pressed. "I don't have to give you explanations for every financial decision," Victoria shot back, regaining some of her usual arrogance. "I did what was best for everyone." Alberto, the doorman, cleared his throat, uncomfortable but determined to speak. "Mr. Ethan," he said, "several times I overheard Mrs. Victoria on the phone in the lobby about a nursing home. She mentioned visits, evaluations, and talked to her driver about mapping out routes to see the facilities." The property manager nodded, adding, "And there were complaints from some neighbors because she wouldn't allow her father-in-law on the balcony. She said it looked bad to have an old man on display." Each testimony was another brick falling from the wall of lies. Victoria tried to interrupt, to justify, to deflect, but the evidence mounted, irrefutable, like a river whose current had finally broken the dam holding it back. Maria, who had remained silent, approached Arthur and, with a protective gesture, placed a blanket over his shoulders. The old man gave her a look of gratitude that was worth 1,000 words. "I want to see the documents for the Queen's house," Ethan demanded, turning to Victoria. "All of them, right now." "They're in the office safe," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan left the room for a few minutes. The silence grew thick, almost tangible. Arthur looked out the window at the sky beginning to turn orange and purple. He thought of Catherine, of what she would have said about all this, and felt a strange calm, as if she were there beside him, holding his hand. When Ethan returned, he was carrying a folder full of documents. He placed them on the dining table and began to review them, each page revealing a new betrayal. The house had never been sold. It was still in Arthur's name, but there was a series of documents prepared to transfer it to a company that, according to the papers, belonged to Victoria. "You've been managing the house as if it were yours," Ethan said, his voice trembling with indignation. "Collecting rent, planning its sale, all behind my father's back and mine." "It was more practical," Victoria defended, though her tone had lost all conviction. "You were busy with the company. Your father doesn't understand business." "I understand enough," Arthur interrupted. Everyone turned to him as he stood, leaning on his cane. Though his body trembled slightly, his voice was clear and firm. "I understand the difference between right and wrong, between honesty and deceit, between respect and humiliation." Something in his words, in the dignity that emanated from that frail body, seemed to strike a chord with everyone present. Even Victoria lowered her gaze, unable to meet his. Ethan approached his father and, in a gesture that surprised everyone, knelt before him, taking his wounded hands in his. "Forgive me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I failed you as a son. I was so busy building my own success that I forgot where I came from. I forgot everything you sacrificed for me." Arthur gently shook his head. "You didn't fail me, son," he answered with a tired but genuine smile. "You were just blind, but now you see, and that's what matters." Ethan stood up and, with renewed determination, turned to the witnesses. "I want what happened here on record," he said. "The abuse, the attempted misappropriation of assets, everything." The property manager nodded, closing her notebook. "I will draft a report," she assured him. "And as the legal representative of the condominium, I can testify if necessary." Alberto also nodded in solidarity. "What they did to Mr. Arthur isn't right," he said simply. "And tricking you isn't right either, Mr. Ethan." Victoria, seeing the situation was irreversible, tried one last tactic. She approached Ethan, her expression softening, almost pleading. "We can sort this out between us, darling," she murmured. "We don't need to involve strangers, create a scandal. Let's talk, find a solution." But Ethan was no longer listening to her manipulations. With a firm gesture, he pointed to the master bedroom. "Pack a bag," he said. "You have 1 hour. You can arrange for the rest of your things later, when my lawyer contacts you. You are not sleeping here tonight." "You're throwing me out on the street?" Victoria asked, incredulous. "Over this misunderstanding?" "It's not a misunderstanding," Ethan replied. "It's elder abuse. It's a breach of trust. It's unforgivable." Victoria looked at everyone present, searching for an ally, a crack in the conviction that now united them. She found none. With a final gesture of disdain, she went to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her harder than necessary. In the living room, the atmosphere seemed to lighten, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. Arthur breathed more freely, his shoulders less slumped. Maria allowed herself a small smile as she collected the shards of the broken plate, no longer afraid. The property manager said her goodbyes, promising to send a copy of the report the next day. Alberto shook Arthur's hand before leaving, a simple but respectful gesture, something the old man hadn't received in a long time. When they were alone, Ethan sat next to his father. The silence between them was different now, clean and clear like the air after a storm. The house, which for months had been a cold and hostile space for Arthur, seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls themselves had been freed from a toxic presence. "What are we going to do now?" Arthur asked, looking at the window where the sky was gradually darkening. Ethan followed his gaze, watching the twilight fall over the city. "The right thing," he answered simply. "For the first time in a long time, we're going to do the right thing." And at that moment, as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Arthur felt that dignity, that silent companion he had lost in the cold corridors of that luxurious apartment, was returning to his side, like an old friend who should never have left. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the sky itself were celebrating the change that had occurred in that Upper East Side apartment. The sun's rays poured unobstructed through the windows, bathing the furniture in a golden light that seemed to renew every corner. Arthur woke up early, as he always did, but this time without the weight of anxiety in his chest. He sat up slowly, expecting the usual pain in his joints, surprised to find it was less intense, as if the emotional release had also eased his body. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toast wafted from the kitchen. Familiar, everyday sounds, but now they held a different meaning. He dressed with care, choosing a light blue shirt that Catherine had given him years ago, one he rarely wore for fear of Victoria's criticism. Today he wanted to feel like himself, to reclaim some of the identity he had been losing over the past few months. When he left his room, he found Ethan in the kitchen, making breakfast. His son, usually dressed in impeccable suits and always in a hurry, was wearing a simple t-shirt and cotton pants. He looked younger, closer to the young man he had once been, before success and appearances had changed him. "Good morning, Dad," he greeted with a genuine smile. "Did you sleep well?" Arthur sat at the table, where 2 steaming cups of coffee waited alongside fresh toast, fruit, and scrambled eggs. "Better than I have in months," he replied, gratefully accepting the cup Ethan offered him. "And you? Aren't you going to work today?" Ethan shook his head as he sat across from him. "Today we have more important things to do," he said with determination. "I took a few days off. The company won't fall apart if I'm gone for a week." They had breakfast together, talking as they hadn't in years. Ethan told him about his work, projects he had in mind, mistakes he had made. Arthur listened, nodding occasionally, surprised that his opinion was valued again, that his words mattered. "I called my lawyer yesterday," Ethan mentioned as he cleared the plates. "I explained the situation with Victoria and the house in Queens. He's coming this afternoon to help us sort everything out." "What will happen to her?" Arthur asked. There was no resentment in his voice, only genuine concern. Ethan sighed, sitting down again. "I won't lie to you, Dad. This doesn't end with her leaving last night. What she did, the abuse, the attempt to take your house, these are serious things. My lawyer recommends filing a formal complaint." Arthur nodded slowly. He was not a vengeful man, but he understood the need for consequences, for justice, that big, sometimes distant word, to manifest in something concrete. "Is it the right thing to do?" he asked, more to himself than to his son. "It is," Ethan affirmed with conviction. "Not just for you, but for other elderly people who might be suffering in similar situations. The abuse of vulnerable people cannot go unpunished, Dad, no matter who commits it." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Maria, arriving for her usual shift. She entered with some hesitation, as if unsure how the dynamics had changed after yesterday's events. "Good morning," she greeted, her purse still slung over her shoulder. "Am I still working here, or—" "Of course, Maria," Ethan replied, approaching her. "And I want to thank you for what you did yesterday. Your courage was crucial in bringing the truth to light." Maria smiled, visibly relieved. "I just did what was right," she said simply. "Mr. Arthur didn't deserve that treatment. No one does." Over the next few hours, the apartment underwent a subtle but profound transformation. Maria no longer cleaned in constant fear of criticism. Ethan worked on his laptop in the living room, staying close to his father. Arthur allowed himself to sit on the balcony, enjoying the sun and fresh air, without fear of being reprimanded. In the mid-afternoon, the lawyer arrived, a middle-aged man named Martinez with a serious but kind expression. He reviewed the documents related to the Queen's house and listened attentively to the account of what had happened, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking specific questions. When he heard the recordings Maria had collected, his expression hardened noticeably. "This is elder abuse," he said firmly. "And there is clear evidence of financial coercion. These are crimes defined in the Penal Code, Mr. Mendez. We have a solid case." Ethan nodded, looking at his father for confirmation. Arthur, sitting in his armchair by the window, took a deep breath before answering. "Proceed," he said in a clear voice. "Not for revenge, but for justice. So, this doesn't happen to anyone else." The following weeks were a mix of legal activity and family rebuilding. The formal complaint was filed with the city's Adult Protective Services Division. The recordings, the testimonies from the doorman and the property manager, the photographic evidence of Arthur's bruised hands, it all formed a powerful dossier that left no room for doubt. Victoria was subpoenaed to testify. She tried to deny the accusations, then to downplay them, and finally to blame stress and a supposed lack of support. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the judge, after hearing the testimonies, issued precautionary measures. A restraining order preventing her from approaching Arthur, a no-contact order, and an order for the restitution of all improperly appropriated assets. The house in Queens was legally confirmed as Arthur's sole property, and all the rental income Victoria had collected for months had to be returned with interest. Furthermore, the judge ordered mandatory community service at a senior care center, a measure intended not just to punish, but to re-educate. The news appeared in the local media. Businesswoman convicted of abusing elderly father-in-law. There was no sensationalism or morbid detail, just the clear statement that the dignity of the elderly was protected by law, and that violating it had consequences. While the legal process ran its course, life in the apartment found a new rhythm. Ethan had reorganized his priorities, cutting back his work hours to spend more time with his father. Together, they began to transform the space that had once been Victoria's territory. They moved some furniture, rearranged paintings, and opened windows that had always remained closed. Arthur's room was moved to a larger, sunnier one, with a view of the building's garden. Ethan insisted he have a comfortable armchair by the window, a small bookshelf with his favorite books, and space to display the photographs he had once been forced to keep hidden. One Saturday morning, Ethan surprised his father with an unexpected proposal. "Would you like to go to Queens today?" he asked at breakfast. "We could visit your house, see how it is, say hello to the neighbors." Arthur's eyes lit up. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Ethan assured him. "It's time for you to go back to your neighborhood, to your roots, and I want to go with you." The trip to Queens was like a journey back in time. The bustling streets, the food stalls, the children playing on the sidewalks. Everything was both the same and different, as is the case with places that are an essential part of our history. The house, a modest but solid building, showed signs of neglect in the garden, but it was still standing, waiting. Mrs. Gable, the lifelong neighbor, welcomed them with hugs and tears of joy. She made coffee and sweet rolls, and the three of them talked for hours in the small backyard, where a withered but resilient wisteria clung to the wall. "This house still has a lot of life in it," Mrs. Gable commented. "It just needs someone to love it again." Ethan watched his father, noticing how his face came alive as he talked about the old days, about shared memories, about the life he had built with Catherine. It was then that he made a decision that had been maturing for days. "Would you like to move back here, Dad?" he asked. "We could fix up the house, modernize it a bit to make it more comfortable, but keep its essence. And I would come visit often, much more than before." Arthur looked at his son in surprise. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted me close, in the apartment." "I want you to be where you're happiest," Ethan replied with sincerity. "And I see how you light up here, how this place brings you back to yourself. Besides," he added with a smile, "it's not that far. I can come every day if you want." When they returned to the apartment that afternoon, they brought with them a pot with a small wisteria seedling that Mrs. Gable had given them. "So, you have a piece of Queens while you decide," the woman had said with a knowing smile. The following days were filled with deep conversations, plans, and decisions. Ethan contacted an architect to assess the necessary renovations for the Queens house, ensuring they would be respectful of its history. Arthur, for his part, rediscovered small daily joys, going out on the balcony without fear, inviting Maria for coffee after her shift, talking on the phone with old friends without feeling like he was a bother. One afternoon, as they were having coffee on the balcony, Ethan took his father's hand. "I thought I had forgotten you among my buildings, my meetings, and my trips," he said with an emotional voice. "I became so obsessed with building my future that I forgot to honor my past." Arthur gently squeezed his son's hand. "You hadn't forgotten me. You just lost your way for a while. But you're here now, and that's what matters." "You will never be alone again," Ethan promised. "I will never again allow anyone to disrespect you or make you feel inferior. You are my father, and honoring you isn't just about giving you material things. It's about protecting your dignity, your right to grow old with respect." Arthur smiled, feeling the warmth of those words fill his chest with a peace he thought he had lost forever. "Then we've already won," he whispered, "because where there is respect, a family can stand." The following weeks brought more positive changes. The wisteria seedling began to bloom in its pot. The house in Queens was renovated with care and love, respecting every corner that held important memories. Arthur started attending Sunday Mass again, first at the elegant parish in the city, then at his beloved church in Queens, where Father Thomas welcomed him like a returning son. The photo of Catherine, which had once been hidden in a drawer, now held a place of honor in the main living room. Beside it, new photographs were added. Arthur and Ethan in the park, both smiling in the sun. Maria proudly showing off a cake she had learned to bake. Even a picture from the return to Queens, with Mrs. Gable and other neighbors gathered at the door of the newly restored house. The rosary, which for so long had been Arthur's only comfort, no longer felt the same in his fingers. He continued to pray every night, giving thanks for this new beginning, but now his prayers were not desperate pleas, but expressions of gratitude for the justice received, the dignity recovered, and the love that had endured the trials of time and adversity. And when anyone asked what had happened, what had brought about such a profound change in the relationship between father and son, Ethan would answer simply but firmly, "I learned it late, but I learned it well. To honor your father is to protect his old age." And where there is respect, a family doesn't just endure, it flourishes, it grows, it becomes stronger, like that wisteria that now adorns our window, reminding us that even after neglect, life can be reborn with greater strength if it is cared for with love.